Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
And also by a live training with Eva Lotta Lamb this Friday, where together, online, in person, or if you want, you can also have the replay of this, we get to learn together how to draw yoga stick figures and draw out those yoga sequences or the yoga notes that we are wanting to take. I'm so excited about this because we actually get to get together online and in person, see each other's faces, and have a really fun Friday together. So if you're listening in real time, it's this Friday, April the 30th, 2021. Yes, there's a replay. If you have any questions at all about this, or you want to jump in and register, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look under trainings and events. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. If we have not met yet, I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. I've been a yoga teacher now for over 15 years. Actually, this week is the 10-year anniversary of when I became a 500-hour yoga teacher. It popped up on my Facebook memories, and it was just really fun to look back at that time. Through the years, as I've been learning as a yoga teacher and also an entrepreneur, I have been talking to so many yoga teachers, different yoga studios, and also business educators. And I really wanted you to have access to those conversations. And that's where the podcast was born, so that you have this place where you can come and check in each and every week and where we can learn together. That is really what's going to happen in today's episode. I'm learning right along with you in this, and I'm really excited about that as well. And at the same time as I'm excited, I'm also feeling a little bit vulnerable or nervous about today's episode, because if you've been listening for a while, you know that I'm really all about learning together, not having all of the answers, really having more questions, being able to speak about those questions that we have, and supporting our peer yoga teachers. And so it is maybe a first time that I'm actually bringing a yoga teacher name onto the podcast and bringing an open letter to the podcast that I wrote to this yoga teacher and podcaster. And so it's been with a lot of time and a lot of consideration that I am sharing that here. It's something that I feel really strongly about. I am passionate about social justice issues and creating braver and safer yoga spaces that allow everyone to feel welcome. Now, before we dig in further and you get to hear about our amazing guests who are going to help to teach all of us lots of things, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Schedulicity.
Hello, Connected Yoga Teachers. This is Matt with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. One way to make your yoga practice more accessible is to empower potential new students with information and inspiration before they walk through the door. By describing your classes and workshops on Schedulicity, students can educate themselves before choosing the type of yoga instruction that's right for them. They can sign up for a class instantly while their curiosity is piqued and know that a spot will be waiting for them. What better way to start a new yoga journey than by feeling welcomed and included before the class even begins?
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity, for the amazing work that you're doing, for really allowing me to keep my calendar organized and up to date. It means a lot. Okay, Connected Yoga Teachers, I want to share an open letter that I wrote to Jay Brown back at the end of March. It was on March 23rd when I posted this open letter. And it was about a podcast that he had released. And to clarify, I'm not a regular listener to his podcast, but I had been following because there was a recent episode about vaccine misinformation and conspiracy theories. And I really wanted to have a listen to make sure that maybe the proper information was getting out to yoga teachers. And I saw an episode pop up that said something about gender, and I really assumed that there was going to be a conversation about how to have gender inclusive language. I've been doing a small amount of studying on my own about this. We did a podcast with Tristan Katz. We've been doing some work inside of pelvic health professionals as well and some training. And I just thought that was going to add to the conversation. And this is where I realized very quickly, I was shocked and disappointed to realize that the guest was not an educator, not a trans educator, but was a cisgender woman who was sharing very harmful and confusing and inaccurate information. It's quite a long podcast, and I've already heard from some friends how harmful it is. So I just want to give a trigger warning that there is transphobia in that podcast. If you really want to listen to a small piece of it, there's about 20 minutes. If you start around an hour in and you listen for about 20 minutes, you can get a lot of the talking points in that 20 minutes, and you can get a really strong sense of the amount of harm as well. It's not something I recommend that you go and have a listen to, but definitely if you feel led and you really want to possibly write your own letter or hear some of the misinformation out there, it's still up as I'm recording here today, sadly. So the reason why we're bringing this also onto the podcast today is because I feel like yoga teachers need access to the correct, non-harming, that ahimsa piece of yoga and the most up-to-date and accurate information, especially when we see something like this come out into the yoga spaces, and we need to make sure that our education is where it needs to be. So as I said to you, I'm here learning with you. We have two amazing guests that we're going to get to hear from after I read my open letter to you. Maygen Nicholson and Avery Kalapa are both here with us. They do an amazing job of introducing themselves. I'm so excited for you to hear that. But I do want to tell you a little bit about them as well. Maygen Nicholson uses she, they pronouns, and they're both a previous yoga teacher and dancer. And now they specialize in LGBTQIA+ inclusion and validation education. Maygen has seen the queer and trans exclusion and discrimination in both yoga and dance spaces. And this is what led her to educate within these industries, so that together we can create access, equity, and inclusion for everyone. Maygen believes that the systems that harm all marginalized people actually harm all of us. We're all affected by that. And our other guest expert and educator today is Avery Kalapa. Avery uses they, them pronouns. They're a yoga teacher, community weaver, organizer, and educator with over 20 years of experience. And they hold special certification in yoga for the pelvic floor. So you better believe, connected yoga teachers, that I've already talked to Avery about coming over and educating us about trans and non-binary and gender inclusive language for those we work with in the pelvic health spaces that we have. Avery's approach is rooted in anti-oppression, yoga for inner healing, and collective liberation. They love creating healing spaces that cherish and center queer and trans folks and that don't require assimilation. Avery is involved in various yoga equity projects, and you are going to hear about those, and there will be so many links in the show notes so that you can go and find out even more beyond today's podcast episode. I highly recommend that you do, connected yoga teachers. I have learned so much over the last month because of this. If there is one silver lining of this podcast that went out there and caused a lot of harm, in my view, it is that we are now here together today and having this conversation. Okay, so before we dive into the learning with Maygen and Avery, I'm going to read you the open letter that I sent to Jay Brown. And there are even a few edits since I sent this letter. I'll try and find them for you and tell you why I made these edits, or why I'm telling you about these edits now. The letter's sent, but here's what I said. Dear Jay, I listened to your podcast this week and felt the need to reach out. First, I want to clarify that I'm not an expert in transgender competency and gender language. I'm a cisgender yoga teacher trying to learn so I can create braver, safe, and inclusive spaces. So this is one spot right here, Connected Yoga Teachers. I had said so that I can create brave, safe, and inclusive spaces. And I've learned over the last month that I cannot guarantee a safe space for anyone. I can create safer spaces and more inclusive spaces, more affirming spaces, but I need to even learn about my own language here. Okay, so I went on to write, I feel like the podcast episode from this week was harmful in many ways to both yoga students and teachers. For example, your guest this week said trans women are not women. If yoga teachers only listen to your podcast on this topic and don't research other sources of information from the transgender community, they could very well spread this misinformation in harmful ways in their communities, families, and yoga spaces. Yes, I believe the conversation of gender is relative to the yoga world, just like the topic of racism and oppression and cultural appropriation need to be talked about. To bring a guest on to start this conversation that is not transgender and to give voice to so many harmful statements and ideas, it goes against anything I understand as practicing yoga. You could have opened up the conversation with someone from the transgender community first, who is out there educating others on this topic. That way, you and your listeners would be able to formulate better questions for this week's guest. This episode is comparable to asking a white yoga teacher to come on the podcast to talk about and challenge the BIPOC community on anti-racism work. As podcasters, we need to acknowledge the incredible responsibility and privilege that goes along with having a platform. I heard you deny that this was even a thing a few weeks ago when it came to a discussion around vaccines and the conspiracy theories and misinformation you were sharing. It is totally fine to not know all of the answers, but it is your responsibility to do the research and find the experts that are doing the work. Yoga teachers out there are listening to you and relying on you to bring them correct and up-to-date information and or to ask a lot of questions when a guest is sharing a singular viewpoint. And then I asked for 3 action items, Connected Yoga Teachers. I wrote, I would like to request that you consider 1, paying for transgender competency training, 2, having multiple guest experts from the trans community on your podcast who can talk about gender language and transgender competency in yoga spaces, and 3, acknowledging and addressing the harm caused and asking the trans and non-binary community how to move forward while paying for their time. Let me know if you would like me to connect you with anyone in this field, Shannon Crow, she, her. So that is the open letter that I wrote, and now let's dive into learning from both Maygen and Avery. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Maygen and Avery. It's so great to have you both here today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so excited for this conversation.
Me too. Avery, you wanted to lead us in a little opening of today's episode?
Sure. Yeah. So welcome, everyone. I thought it would be nice to enter in this conversation with a little embodiment. So wherever you are, if you're able to close your eyes or drop in, obviously, if you're driving, don't close your eyes. But let's spend just a moment sitting tall. And now make a conscious transition out of your mind and into your body. Into the somatic landscape of sensation. What is right now, right here, alive in you? And now to center us, to ground us, to nourish us in this conversation, take a moment wherever you are to feel down into the earth, into the land that is supporting you. Acknowledge that the story of your life is woven into the story of this place. That your healing, your awakening is deeply entwined and connected with the healing and awakening happening in the collective. Take a moment to acknowledge the spirits of this place, the ancestors of this place, the plants and animals of this place who share the water, air, and sunlight. Take a moment to honor, to acknowledge the past, present, and future Indigenous people of this place. In Albuquerque, where I am, I'm on unceded Tewa land, Pueblo land. May we lean in with humility into this connection, the possibility, the responsibility, the glory of being alive now, being able to shift and heal and transform the patterns of the past to create a more harmonious and just future for all of us. Just breathe into that possibility. A few more breaths here. And then you can slowly come back. And as you maybe open your eyes or go back to whatever it was you were doing while you're listening to this, I really invite you throughout this conversation to keep returning to your body and your breath. Sometimes when we discuss difficult things or unfamiliar things, without even realizing, it can stir up our sympathetic nervous system, our kind of fight, flight, survival mode. And by noticing your sensations and your breath, that actually sends a signal to your nervous system that you are safe enough, that you can calm down and be present, which really helps open up more space for change, for shifting out of the old patterns and into new possibility. So I really want to welcome you into that receptive, more relaxed, grounded place of, oh, maybe we'll be talking about some new things or some surprising things for the purpose of growth and healing and creating a more just and inclusive space in our yoga world and in our greater world. But keep coming back to your body and your breath. That alone is actually quite powerful.
Thank you so much for that, Avery. I feel like I need this at the start of each and every podcast episode now. Would both of you like to do an introduction and share anything that you'd like to about the work that you do, where you are, the pronouns that you use, and anything else?
Hi, everybody. My name is Maygen Nicholson. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I always like to name my social location, especially in this work, because it's really important that we are acknowledging where we have privilege and where we are marginalized. So it just really informs how we show up in this work and also how we show up for ourselves in this work. So I'm white, queer, gender expansive, able-bodied, in a thinner body, English as a first language, US citizen, access to funds and in emergencies, person. I say all of that just to acknowledge that even though I hold marginalizations, I have a lot of privilege. So I just want everybody to understand that about me. It's always really important for me to share that. And I'm currently on unceded Wichita land that we now know as Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, which is where I'm originally from. Kind of was a COVID transplant to here from Los Angeles, where I lived for the past 12 years until COVID hit. And now I'm back here for the time being. I am a queer and trans inclusion and affirmation educator. I focus primarily in the wellness and dance industries and predominantly in the yoga spaces and wellness because that's a part of my past as a yoga teacher. I also was a professional dancer. So I tend to kind of bounce back and forth between both of those communities and industries to really help people foster safer and affirming spaces for my community.
Thank you so much, Maygen. Avery, tell us whatever you'd like about yourself.
Yay. Hi, my name is Avery Kalapa. My pronouns are they, them. I am a certified Iyengar yoga teacher, an organizer, a community weaver. And my approach to yoga is rooted in anti-oppression. I love exploring yoga as an inner healing practice for collective liberation. And I love creating healing spaces that cherish and center queer and trans folks and others who are often left out of mainstream yoga spaces. Yoga that doesn't require assimilation feels very powerful to me. I also have a vast knowledge of integrative functional anatomy and stability, and I love embodied yoga philosophy. So I'm a sincere and long-time yoga practitioner. And I love anywhere where the yoga world and queer and trans worlds merge. That's really the rich spaces that I love to inhabit and create more and more of. What else? Yeah, I'm involved in some various equity projects, such as Albuquerque Queer Trans Community Yoga. I also love to garden. I'm a parent. I'm white, queer, non-binary, mixed class, neurodivergent, all these things. I'm also very magical. And I'm a settler. As well, which is an interesting place to be in, right? And I live in Albuquerque, on Tiwa land. So happy to be here and so ready for this conversation.
Thank you both for really creating an introduction that allowed us to see you a bit more. I think it was super powerful for me. And because we're audio only and sending out the audio and people are unable to see the video, that was really helpful for me. I want to talk about, first of all, Avery, you brought up this word of anti-oppression yoga. And that's, I feel like, getting to know Maygen and you over the last few weeks. I feel like I'm sticking on this right now because I have a feeling that that's what our yoga teachers all want to be creating in their yoga classes. So I'm excited that we get to have this conversation and talk about how we can do that, especially if we have trans yoga students coming to our classes. How can we lead these anti-oppression yoga spaces? How can we have inclusive yoga spaces?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say. Like a podcast episode isn't going to cover, all the ways in which you can be in affirming practices for our community, but it's so many things. Very important that you are doing your own internal work around dismantling biases that you hold towards queer and trans folks. Those biases are inherent in all of us. Transphobia lives in all of us. These are conditionings that we have been taught, that have been passed down to us. So it is deep internal work to release all of these things that hold us back from being able to love others fully, yes, but also to be able to fully love ourselves. So, it's really important that you're in the work of educating yourself, and the deeper work of svadhyaya, self-study, of understanding where all these thoughts and beliefs come from, and noticing when they arise, noticing how you react to them, and what comes out of them. So that's, one thing is just to be in a constant, perpetual state of self-study and educating yourself. And I think, so often we focus on the yoga students coming into the space, which is really important for you to understand how to create safer spaces for our community. But also, we need trans folks to be leading more in spaces, right? So, this is why I say it's really important for you to recognize where your privileges lie, because there are points where you have to take a step back, where you have to take a seat and give an opportunity to somebody who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity, right? Like in the yoga industry, especially like on the cover of Yoga Journal, in Yoga International, and everywhere that we know of quote unquote famous yoga teachers. They're all white, cis, usually straight, able-bodied, thinner-bodied individuals. So it's equally important that you're doing the work of equity, which means that you are creating space for other trans folks to have opportunities. And not only that, but to bring richness and vastness and magic into your space. Trans people are magic. We just are. So your spaces are better with us in them. And, so if you're a studio owner, or if you have a lot of privilege in the studio that you do teach at, you can advocate for trans folks, non-binary folks, people of color, Black folks to be a part of teacher trainings. And, but at the same time, it's really important that you're doing the deeper work to understand how to become a safer and more affirming person for our community. So those things, predominantly, if we're speaking just to the yoga space, those are like good places to start.
I feel like there's an endless amount of education out there right now that we as yoga teachers who really want to dig in and create inclusive spaces, there's so many avenues that we can do this, especially if we want to create like trans affirming yoga spaces. So thank you so much for saying like we can't cover it all today on the podcast. Avery, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I love this question. And I want to name that I think it's easy for yoga teachers to feel swamped by all the responsibilities, like, oh, I have to figure out this and that and market my classes and figure out how to teach well. And then on top of that, as this side project, be inclusive. And I want to shift that perspective that actually this work is the yoga. It's not like something separate from, like our, say, anti-oppression work isn't separate from yoga. It very much is part of healing our relationship with ourselves and each other and reconnecting to the intelligence of our heart. It's not something separate. That's a big piece because, anti-oppression, like what does that even mean? It's a big word. So quickly activism words get co-opted and kind of can lose their meaning. But for me, like what is oppression? It's pretty much the opposite of yoga. Like if yoga is union and integration, then oppression is division. it's supremacy. It's creating a false hierarchy that values someone's life over someone else's life. And that is the opposite of yoga. So if we're interested in yoga, if we're interested in integration and harmony and abundance and those values that are easy to get on board with, like who doesn't want that? I think by its nature, then of course we should also be interested in anti-oppression work that is shifting the power dynamic of whose lives are valued and who doesn't, like who doesn't have access to healthcare and food and housing and all those things. And I really love the Sonali Fisk quote. And I'm paraphrasing because I'm trying to look it up and I can't find the exact quote, but she said something like, in order to be inclusive, you have to first look at what is it about you or your space that is exclusive, right? Like why? Because if there wasn't some exclusivity, then our spaces would be diverse, right? But if most of our classes are cis, hetero, white women or whatever, then that might be a clue, like, oh, there might be some exclusivity being expressed in this space. Maybe this space isn't actually as welcoming as I think it's going to be. And so that's actually a really kind of fruitful, it's a place of possibility where you recognize, oh, maybe this isn't such a welcoming space. The tendency is to become defensive and say, oh, well, I'm inclusive. My space is welcoming to everybody. It's a little different to think, oh, well, what is it about the way I'm going about things that actually may not be welcoming and inclusive? And yeah, we had talked in our conversation prior to this about an unchecked, possibly even unrecognized awkwardness that happens when cis people are around trans people, especially gender non-conforming people, because there's plenty of trans folks walking around that you may not know are trans, and you don't need to know that they're trans. But if they fit into these gender categories, probably you're not going to be hyper awkward around them. But if someone's standing in front of you who obviously is on some is out of those male female gender boxes, like something about it, you're like, oh, this person is trans or non-binary. Often there's a super awkwardness that happens, and it happens in a split second. It's something that happens in our limbic system before we might even have the thought of like, oh, this is a person. This might be a trans person. Maybe I need to be kind to them. Like before you even have that thought, your body and your nervous system may have already sent some message that you are kind of freaked out by this person, and that person can feel it. They can feel like, oh, great, here, now I have to deal with someone's awkwardness about my gender. And that's exhausting. Like that's enough of a reason not to even go to a yoga class in the first place. If you know you're going to have to be around people who are super awkward about your gender. And awkwardness is really kind of on like one end of a spectrum. Like it could be much worse than that, right? Like it could potentially be violence, but probably it's going to be some experience that affirms that you're not safe and you're not welcome and that you are an outsider, right? We don't always realize the ways that we uphold those norms that say some people belong and then some people don't. So yeah, let's talk about this more. Like how do we start to break that down? And what can we do? We all have different forms of privilege and social location. And so then how do we understand our work, not as a burden that we have to do in order to prove that we're good people, but because we have this beautiful, precious opportunity to make the world less harmful, what can we do to change and shift the environment and shift how we're showing up so that actually the space is more inclusive?
This is so good. And I'm so grateful for you bringing up the whole point of like, yoga teachers have so much to think about already. And like you said, we might feel like this is an added burden. I know coming out of my 200-hour yoga teacher training, I was just like, how am I going to cue this one pose and look after the pregnant person in my class? Like those were my, big goals. And you said it so well. This is the yoga as we go through. And I think especially right now, what we've all gone through in 2020 together feels like we're starting to take a look at, like, how can this really be the yoga that we are doing? So thank you for bringing light to that. And also, either one of you are welcome to answer this. Why do you think that awkwardness is there? Maygen said, we all have an inner transphobia in all of us. And if some of you are like, well, I don't, just remember the conversation about like, we all have some amount of racism inside of us, or, our minds have definitely been colonized. We know that now. Do you think that's what it is? Or why do you think we have this awkwardness? I'm saying we as a cis person.
I just think people are really unaware of, like, if you're a person that holds a lot of privilege, you have to do work to understand lived experiences outside of your own. So I think it's, also, I know a lot of people get really nervous about when they are in front of somebody that's gender nonconforming, like how do I, what do I say? What do I do? How do I, it can feel like a lot. And then it just becomes this horrendous experience for that trans or gender nonconforming person. So I think, there's a lot of different reasons for that awkwardness. And one thing I will say is that, this work, every time I do a training or a workshop, I always say, one workshop isn't going to cut it, right? Like, this is an ongoing practice. It is a part of your yoga, right? And if yoga is a lifelong practice, well, so is this. And so becoming a person free of biases takes time. And not only that, on some form, you're going to have to check your biases for the rest of your life. And these, the consequences of white supremacy live so deep. They're so deeply ingrained in us, and it's insidious. And it insists on sticking around. So you have to really be, it is a daily, all day, every day practice, right? To be really aware of how this is showing up and to learn and to listen to folks that are outside of your lived experience and to notice when those biases show up in form of not believing somebody, which we've, seen in the past few weeks from the situation we have yet to mention. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different reasons for that awkwardness, but I mainly just wanted to put it out there that while we're all on our own journeys of doing this work, just to be vigorous about it, yes, and also patient with yourself, as it does take time. If we think about that, we all have been conditioned in these ways that have existed for centuries, then how much, then that means there's that amount time of work to really unweave this complicated web that we all have within us.
Avery, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. I think this is such an important question, actually, right? Like, why the awkwardness or why the resistance to let go of this false idea of gender being strictly binary, backed up by biology? Like, why do people cling to that? And from a yogic perspective, I just see, oh, this is asmita. Like, this is a clinging to a sense of self that is connected to illusion. But it's scary, right? Like, from the time we were babies, you're told you are male or female. So this is deep, deep stuff related to our sense of self. And anything that disrupts your sense of self is going to be scary. You're probably going to resist it. And so I like to think of this like if you go into even the definition of yoga, right? Like yoga chitta vritti nirodha, very beginning, Patanjali lays out yoga is the cessation of movements of consciousness. I really see this attachment to this sort of like biological binary gender as that. It's like an illusion. It's movements in the consciousness. And Patanjali says, then in Sutra 1.3, tadadrashtu svarupe avastanam. So when those movements in the consciousness cease, then the seer dwells in their own true splendor, right? Like by letting go of these ideas, we actually get to discover, and I'll read Iyengar's words, it's so beautiful, when the waves of consciousness are stilled and silenced, they can no longer distort the true expression of the soul. Revealed in their own nature, the radiant seer abides in their own grandeur. Sutra 1.4 says, at other times, the seer identifies with the fluctuating consciousness. So I want you to keep that in mind as I share the next piece, that, this attachment I have around gender actually may be what is pulling me away from the truth and the splendor and the clarity of knowing who I am deeply on a soul level, right? So I'm saying that for hopefully some buy-in, because the next thing I'm going to say is not so pretty. So say we let go of binary gender, and trans and non-binary people and gender non-conforming people are respected and included, and they have access to healthcare and youth sports and all those things. What do cis people really have to lose if trans people are cherished? The comforting righteousness of a false superiority embedded deeply into their sense of self. I really think this is it. And it's the same reason why, right, like it's a process to divest from whiteness or any other form of privilege. But it's tricky because that stuff props up this feeling of like, I am right, I am good, I'm natural, I belong here, I'm the way God made me, or whatever that story is that gives you this sense of superiority because you're cisgendered. This feeling of like, I belong here and I'm right in my life, I'm right and you're wrong. Because if trans people are also right, then that means I can't cling to this identification with what is not real. I can't cling to that identification and feel the comfort of righteousness that comes from that. So that's what I mean by like, this is the yoga, right? Like it's brave work to be able to lay down and unpack and explore how our identities affect us and give us, like, define us and how we show up and how we relate. But I really think letting go of that false superiority and really being able to see people for who they are, like, oh, this is a person. This is a precious, wise, beautiful person. It's not like, oh, this is someone who freaks me out because they challenge what I feel is normal. Like, I think it really comes down to that. In the process of clinging to feeling normal and kind of good in yourself because you feel normal on some level, so much harm is done. Unrealizing, I think people don't even realize they're sort of clinging to it, but they are. That's what I think about with this recent podcast, right? There was recently this transphobic podcast that Jay Brown hosted, Kachiananda, and many of us have been discussing it. And that entire viewpoint that was discussed, I think, can really be traced back to this feeling of almost like as if trans people are able to be and thrive, as if it somehow is dangerous to those yoga teachers' sense of self, or to like cisgender people's sense of self. Because why else would you cling to something that obviously is harmful, that obviously hurts people, right? Like, why would you misgender? Like, she was talking about trans people as if simultaneously they are dangerous and that they are people that need to somehow be saved by cis people. This is so problematic. She misgendered trans masculine youth, calling them like these young girls, like as if they need to be saved. Really, what they need to be saved from is not having access to trans affirming care, right? Like if you have access, if you're trans and you're able to transition, even just being called the correct pronouns causes a huge percentage rate of suicides to go down. Like it's a clear and measurable effect that very much makes things better for people. And yet in that podcast, she said that people's gender transitions ruined them, that they were ruined by their transitions. Like, how dare she? How dare she say that? And so I've been thinking about this, like why would someone grasp on to something that is obviously harmful and obviously creating suffering, especially if you're a yoga teacher? And I think that's it. It must be like this stuff, it kind of stirs up deep-seated insecurity about who you are, or like if you can't identify some essential qualities that define being a woman and being a man, then who are you? I think that's a very freeing question, but it may well be terrifying. Like it's freeing for me because I've never fit into the gender binary. Like from the time I was a kid, it's been very mutable and very strange having to navigate binary gender. And even now, it still is a journey. But not everyone, some people have had decades and decades of the world telling them, oh yeah, you're normal, you belong, you're a woman, you're a man. And they've never thought about these things. So that was a huge rant, but that's how I would answer that question. Thank you for holding space for all that.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I really appreciate your view on this, sharing how it sounds to you, and just this whole idea of like we are put into a box right from birth. I mean, I was born in the 70s, so you wore the pink blanket home or the blue blanket home. And when I attended Maygen's workshop that they did, it was really liberating for me to to look at where am I on this gender spectrum in terms of many different aspects of me as an individual. Maygen, I want to give you a chance to speak on this as well in terms of the podcast and your thoughts on it as well. I know you listened to the whole thing, I think.
Yes, sadly, I did listen to almost the whole episode. And I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Avery is saying. It's such a deeply embedded thing that's really subconscious. People's reaction to trans folks and to this work, right? To trans liberation. And I also believe that a lot of people, if you're really in this work, it causes you to have to question everything you know about yourself, everything you've been taught about yourself. And so I think for a lot of people, it is this deep-seated fear of, if I believed everything that they're saying or that this educator is teaching on, then what does that mean about me, right? And so it's confronting, and I think that response is so subconscious that it then turns into bigotry and transphobia. And this podcast episode, before we hopped on this recording, we are intentionally decided to not nitpick the episode. And I really know that people are looking for trans folks to really educate them on all the ways in which this episode was problematic by really educating on it. And I think when this first happened, I did start to go at it from that angle. And then I became very tired very fast. It feels like we've been having to beg people to care, to listen to us whenever the information is widely available on the internet, the interwebs. And, the main thing I wanted to say, and I wanted folks to really be aware of, is that when you hear rhetoric like this, whether it's, rooted in transphobia or racism, and by the way, this podcast episode was very much racist as well. Where are they getting this information, right? Like Kachi did not cite any sources or facts. She made up instances and then acted like they were an epidemic. And so I really need folks to understand that this information is very biased and false information that she is sharing widely, and that this kind of fear-mongering information is what expands into anti-trans bills, like what we're seeing happening all across the nation. We're now at 82 anti-trans bills that will affect our trans and non-binary youth all over the nation, and adults as well. And these have dire consequences. If any of these bills get passed, lives will be lost. It is literally life and death. And so while we, think of this podcast episode as just a conversation, it's so much more than that, that has dire consequences. And that we know what the practice of yoga is, right? We know that at the most basic level, we learn that yoga means union. And that this is happening on a yoga podcast, in the yoga industry. And as many people that are asking for harm to be repaired and calling it out, there's just as many people that are supporting it. So this is a wake-up call. If, a lot of people were not aware that transphobia was so pervasive in the yoga industry until this moment. And I want to give a lot of grace to that, because whenever, privilege is insidious in the way that it, when you're not aware of experiences outside of your own, that it kind of creates this veil over your lens that makes it really hard to see what's happening for other people. And so I think, now a lot of people are really waking up to the work that needs to be done, and how it is connected to Black trans women having, a lot of Black trans women having no access to housing or food, right? Or to any sort of work. That these consequences have, the effects are more dire for those that are more marginalized within the trans community. And so if we're going to call ourselves yoga teachers and practitioners, well, then we have a really great responsibility, right? To be a part of the work of collective liberation, and not only in the yoga space, but within policy work, within mutual aid, within nonprofit organizations, right? That we're really supporting the groundwork of this as well. And if we're not doing that work, then can we really call ourselves yoga teachers and practitioners? I don't think so. So what we're speaking to today, this deep inner work that we, a lot of times call inclusion, but it's so much more than that. It's beyond inclusion would be affirmation. creating spaces where folks walk in and have the ability to thrive no matter who they are. This is your responsibility, and it's urgent. It's incredibly urgent. So yeah, I think that's about all that I want to say about the podcast episode. But I really just wanted to, it was important to me to tie it into how it affects people beyond just a yoga podcast episode.
Thank you so much for that. I love that you said we want people to walk into our yoga spaces and thrive no matter who they are. And this is across the board. I know that's what our listeners want. And I just appreciate that you said, like, again, this is the yoga, it's the svadhyaya, and then it's also stepping off of our mat. One thing that I've been really looking at this week is the whole idea of, I don't know who said this week that I was listening to. I've been trying to listen to a lot of voices. It was moving out of like, yeah, I accept trans people, to like something much more than that, like celebrating. You both have said, we're magical. And it's something I think in doing just a fraction of this work, it's pretty ugly to see. Why are we moving to this place of acceptance? I'm going to accept people? Like, how would it feel for cis people to walk into a space and someone's like, well, I guess I'll accept you as she, her, he, him, but that's not really what's normal here. We have no idea what that's like as cis people. No idea. Avery, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's such a journey, right? It's such a journey. And maybe this would just be a good moment to notice, like, little quick body scan. How's your breath? And how are you feeling? I think one reason too, it can be that there's some resistance to getting on board with some of what we've been talking about, is this false sense of scarcity that, like, oh, if we make room for trans people, then, well, is there still going to be room for cis women to have empowerment? And, or somehow pitting different struggles against each other. And really doing this work is going to be liberatory for you. Like, you're going to do less harm, which is exciting. And it might create some shifts for you that will be actually positive and good and freeing. Like, there's room for all of it. There's totally room for learning curves and messing up and keeping going. There's room for trans inclusion, and if cis women need to have like circles to process patriarchy, that's fine. That's great. And if people want to be empowered about gender, like, the point isn't that we're going to like erase all gender. Gender is like this incredible big palette of color, and there's so many different colors and shapes you could paint with it. And I don't know, I just feel like, yeah, like it's actually what we're talking about is, on some level, yeah, it's heavy. Like, there's some sad and heavy parts to this conversation. And I hope there's also a glimmer of enthusiasm and hope that by starting to analyze and unpack and divest from these norms we have around gender, that actually opens up a lot more free space for everybody, including you. Like, there's room for everyone in the gender justice extravaganza. You might not get to be like the big star of the show if you're cis, but you can certainly, like, there's room for all of us in this process. And there's so much benefit. I really think, like, we all benefit so much from getting involved with this work. Like, read trans authors. If you're a feminist, don't miss Julia Serrano or other, there's like amazing trans women that have written about feminism from the most incredible vantage point. learn from trans and non-binary teachers, not because it's like, oh, we need to diversify our teaching staff, but like, actually, we're amazing teachers with a lot to offer and an amazing practice and a really cool take on things that you might not get from someone who hasn't gone through the process of having to toil with their gender and sexuality and go through coming out. I mean, really, there's a deep sense of truth and svadhyaya that trans and gender non-conforming and queer people have. Like, the world doesn't tell you you're queer. You know it inside. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a precious, sacred thing. And so to celebrate it, like, not just accept, right? Like, I don't want to be accepted. And it's not that I need some big, like, people are like, oh, I see you. And it's like, well, great. Like, I like that. But it's not like I need to be seen in a way that I'm requiring special attention or affirmation. Really, I just want to be there and be able to be. Like, my favorite space to be in is a space that is not covered in binary gender. But it's tricky because if you are in a grocery store or a yoga class or any public space that isn't specifically a queer trans space, most likely binary gender is going to be all over the place in the marketing, in the way people speak, in the way people talk to each other and to you and tell stories. Like, it's everywhere. And, so just that piece, like, how cool would it be to have spaces that are not, that aren't so filtered by gender? And how nice would it be, to have spaces where, like, I could just show up and be. I don't know what more there is to say on that, but those are my thoughts.
Avery, all of a sudden I feel like as a cis person, I wear these glasses that make me look at the world in this black and white place. And you just told me about this palette of genders. And we like are wearing these glasses, but we also can't see, like, I don't walk into a store and see gender everywhere. And the more I'm learning about this, I'm realizing there are many spaces where it is existing, including the ones that I hold here on the podcast, in pelvic health professionals, many places. So thank you so much. I love this analogy of the palette. I want to dig into one part that is like the recurring question that I keep hearing after that podcast, and that is around the biological sex and gender. And I realize this is a massive topic. And I also realize that what was shared on that podcast was false. So is there something that is there a place that we can go to learn more about this? We know that we can go to the internet, but is there something also that you want to share about, like, is there a way to summarize that question around gender and biological sex?
Yeah. I will say there are two people that I love to follow and learn a lot from. Dr. Karen, we'll put it in the show notes, and then Skylar Bailar. He is a trans man that is an athletic swimmer. And so between, I feel like a big part of that episode also too that left a lot of folks thinking, or the questions that they have is around trans people in sports as well. So those are two really good people to go to for. Dr. Karen teaches a lot on biological sex and gender, and just how biological sex is not fixed. Katya was very correct that biological sex and gender are different. However, the whole podcast episode was then self-contradictory in the way that it spoke to biological sex as gender. So she really just put her own foot in her mouth in so many ways, right? But biological sex, or sex, we'll just say sex, right, is ever changing and can be changed, can be altered. And One example I like to give, especially when we're talking about the sports, the whole sports thing, is that, people are so quick to attack trans women playing on women's teams because trans women are women, in case anybody didn't know. 150% women, they are women. But nobody is concerned about whenever a Black cis woman, I believe her name is Caster Semenya. She is from South Africa. She's a track runner. She got disqualified. She was not able to compete in a race because her testosterone levels were too high naturally. These were her natural testosterone levels. Yet we have Michael Phelps, a white cis man who's a swimmer, who has high amounts of lactic acid, long arms, and one other thing that I always forget about that makes him have a lot of advantage in his swim meets. But yet he's not disqualified, right? He can still compete. And so the way that we weaponize and conflate sex and gender also has been used to police Black women. And so I always say, like, if we are going to have that conversation, then we need to be having the whole conversation, right? So of those examples, it just goes to show you that, that sex has so many, it's not just genitalia. It's not just external genitalia. There's so many other things that make up our biology and that they're ever changing and they are on a spectrum, but that we've been taught that sex is only external genitalia and it's just not true. So, yeah.
I'll make sure to link to a great video that Dr. Karen does talking about this. So I highly encourage our listeners to go and listen there. Avery, anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess let's just go there, right? Because we're yoga teachers and we work with people's bodies. And of course, in our yoga classes, we probably wouldn't talk about genitals. We might talk about pelvic floor muscles. At least I do. I teach a whole pelvic floor workshop, and it's kind of one of my specialty things that I've loved to study and teach on. And I think this relates back to that awkwardness. I think part of what happens if you're not used to being around trans people, especially, and then here comes someone who is gender ambiguous. Often what happens is you sort of go in your head secretly and perhaps shamefully. It's this behind the scenes thing of like, well, what was this person's assigned gender at birth? But you might really just say in your mind, I wonder if that person has a vagina or a penis. And it might happen very split second without you realizing it. It's like your mind trying to categorize where to place this person so you can kind of make them make sense in your idea of this whole hierarchical world that we're conditioned with, right? And so I think a huge thing, in order to stop doing that, instead of going through that whole process in your head, thinking about someone else's genitals, which is really none of our business, I think a really helpful thing that yoga teachers can do is to understand that genitals and gender are different. And there's a lot of nuance that you could go into with biology. I like, Alok has scientists come on sometimes and talk about hormone, like they've done a ton of cool work interviewing people. Like there's a lot out there that you could dig into. And this is just a simple thing that you can really, I think, with practice, wrap your head around, that some women have penises and some men have vaginas, and some people don't go into either category. We all have some sort of genitals. We all have a pelvic floor. We all have bodies, and we can all do yoga, right? Like we don't need to even think about that. It's such a preset thing that we go there because it helps us categorize people. But really understanding, like unhook that in your mind. Genitals, different from gender. If you can get that, then I think a lot of this will make more sense. And it's tricky. It might take you a few years of kind of grappling and reading and thinking or whatever. But the fact is, some men have vaginas and some women have penises. And so I really think it's like, if you can make peace with that, so much else will make sense about all of this. And it really comes down to, there's a saying that Jacoby said recently when we all did the IG Live with Susanna Barkataki last week. It really comes down to the need to be right versus the right to live. And which of those is the priority? So yeah, I wasn't sure if we wanted to go there, but that is a useful piece, I think, is just to, like, we don't need to worry so much about the biological gender and how gender is related to genitals. Like, there's a lot you could learn there, right? If you're interested, and I mean, there's plenty, but just that basic piece of really disconnecting that, I think that's helpful and is huge.
Yeah, that's so helpful that we don't need to know. And it is, I think it's odd. I think I'm curious about why. And I love how you said we're trying to put someone in this box again so that we can just like orient ourselves as cis people if we haven't had that experience or haven't thought about it before or done some work in this area. Both of you have amazing offerings, and I want to make sure that we tell people where they can learn more from you or others that you recommend, or how they can do yoga or do something else with you. I know that you both have different unique things. Maygen, do you want to start?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like, Shannon, we can leave other resources in the show notes, but one organization that I always say to learn from and support is Trans Yoga Project. They're doing incredible, very important work, and they're just a great collective of the most amazing, magical human beings. So I'll just name that off the top. I do a lot of different things. So I have ongoing workshops that I teach, from as basic as Gender 101 to I'm putting together a new training that's specifically for wellness and movement professionals. Very excited about that one. And I also have a Patreon that's called Liberate Learning Community. And it's a space where we can come together and really be in the work of trans and non-binary and collective liberation as a whole. It goes a little bit deeper than what I do on Instagram and allows us to really unpack things together, and where you can ask questions and just learn more. And all of that is at the links in my bio on Instagram, or we'll link it here. I don't know. But I always have things going on. You can also sign up for my newsletter, which will always keep you informed of things that I'm doing. I'm trying to think what else. I do one-on-one consultations sessions for allies that are looking to, I have a lot of folks, work with a lot of folks that just have specific questions around, their work or their specifics within their life. So that's what those sessions are used for. I just opened up sessions now, which is, I'm very excited about opening my work up in this way as well. But I have pay what you can sessions for queer and trans and non-binary folks who need support around feeling affirmed in who they are, and also on the path of discovery of who they are. So I use a combination of wellness tools and practices, and also the education that I do to help you get more into feeling affirmed in who you are, into being affirmed in who you are, and everything that goes with that. So yeah, and I'm going to open up my work more in that realm as well, to where I can support my queer, trans, and non-binary siblings in this way as well.
Thank you so much. Avery, what about your work? Where can we find you, and tell us about your work?
Yes, thank you. So please join me and follow along. If you're on Instagram, Yoga with Avery, and yogawithavery.com is my website. So always a good place to stay in the loop about workshops and retreats and whatever. I'm always up to all sorts of things. Upcoming, in addition to classes, come take a class with me. I'd love to have you. I have 4 per week, and you can join one at a time, or I also have an unlimited subscription that definitely has some juicy other benefits. But beyond that, I'm teaching a pelvic floor workshop May 15th. It's actually going to be 2 workshops. The first one is open to everyone. So it's definitely a non-binary framework for learning about the pelvic floor through asana, anatomy, and breath. It's a great workshop. And then I'm also going to offer the same workshop just for non-binary and trans folks. So I'm very excited about this because I've taught this workshop for nearly a decade, but I've never done it just for trans and non-binary friends. So check that out, May 15th. It's on Zoom, it's virtual. And then I have several cool embodying non-binary, little inclusion vibe, asana and philosophy-based workshops coming up in June and July through Citizen Yoga and Gabby Markham Yoga. Anyway, some folks are hosting me. So you can learn all about that stuff on my website. I also offer one-on-one mentoring, both for queer and trans yoga teachers to have support and for allies who want to have that one-on-one safe space to ask weird questions, right? Like, well, what about this? I am up for having those conversations with you. And finally, I just want to highlight, if you learned something and you want to kind of pay it forward, Trans Justice Funding Project is an amazing provider of grants to small community-led trans organizations. And they give away hundreds of grants all over the country to specifically trans-led and especially Black, Indigenous, people of color trans-led organizations. And it's so powerful because I've tried to get grants for various things, and it seems like not a lot out there that is accessible if you're not a huge established like medical nonprofit, or, like to get funding for trans community projects is tricky. So send them money. They collect donations and then you can apply for grants, and they just give out money to so many inspiring projects happening all over the country. Another great resource is the New Mexico transgender, I'm blanking on, I always kind of get the lineup of the name right. TRC, New Mexico Transgender Resource Center. And of course, that's local to me, but they also do amazing work. They have support groups and on the ground support, and they do Trans 101 trainings. And again, if you just want to send money somewhere that is doing amazing work and can always use more support, you can check them out. New Mexico, tgrc.org or .com. So yeah, don't be a stranger. I'd love to hear how this all connects. And if you have thoughts, then reach out.
Oh my gosh. Thank you both so much for this. I feel like it's a vast amount of information to take in. I hope our connected yoga teachers really have way more questions now. That's what we're going for. If you end a podcast or you end training or you end something and you have more questions, you're in the right spot. And we're here learning together. Thank you both so much for your time, for all of the work that you're also doing in the world, and for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us, Shannon. It means a lot to be able to have these conversations. And just like Avery said, please keep in touch with us. We're in this work for the long haul. So we would love to see you in spaces with us and be a part of your journeys.
Yeah, thank you so much. Everyone who listened to the end, I appreciate you. And everyone who listened to any of it. And Shannon, thank you so much for creating space for this conversation. And May, it's just been really a treat. So thanks.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Alrighty, Connected Yoga Teachers, thank you so much again for being here. Thank you to Maygen and Avery, who covered so much in today's episode and then gave us an incredible amount of other places to go and continue with this learning. So I will make sure to link to all of that in our show notes. That's where you're going to see me for a while, Connected Yoga Teachers. I realized really quickly over the last month that I have an incredible amount of learning to do as a yoga teacher, as a podcaster, as a human being walking this planet, as someone who runs a business, and also as a pelvic health professional. I did not understand the level of colonization that has happened within our spaces around gender. There are a couple of key takeaways that I hope I can share with you. I hope I can articulate where I'm at with this, Connected Yoga Teachers. One is that we all had like the veil lifted on anti-racism work a little bit more in 2020, I think. I saw this happen in the online business world, in yoga spaces, and you probably tuned in for different podcasts around anti-racism and anti-oppression. I know that yoga teachers are up for this conversation, and it's interesting to me that I did not see this and I did not know about it in the same way with our trans and non-binary communities. And that's on me. You know, it's on me to learn about this and to be more educated on this. And I'm right here with you. You know, let's just jump in, and it's going to be messy as we step forward. Let's just decide, okay, I'm going to learn about something and think on it and see how I can integrate this into my yoga business. The other thing I've been looking at is my reaction to this. You know, I've really had some very reactive days thinking about the harm that is caused by podcasts like this or the bills that are being proposed mostly in the United States right now. And I think what it comes down to in my mind is that there is a tremendous amount of not understanding and not seeing the harm that is being caused. And again, I'm willing to look at how have I been closing my eyes in a way that does not allow me to see the harm from certain things. So if ever, Connected Yoga Teachers, you feel like I've said something, I've done something in my business that doesn't feel like it's creating space for you as an individual or for a population, please know that you can reach out. Call me in. Tell me about something. I'm inviting you to do that. I've invited it before on the podcast. I've gotten some amazing emails back from that, and I've done some learning. So let's commit to doing that together, Connected Yoga Teachers. We can make a lot of change in a hurry when we start to look at ourselves. I just want to say I am so grateful for you listening all the way to today's episode at the very end. I know your time is very valuable and you're busy and you've got a lot of things on the go, and it just means a lot that you're here. And I want to tell you, you're our favorite listener. Shh, don't tell anyone else. I also want to thank our team for making today's episode possible, and another huge thank you to everyone I've been learning from this over the past month and the ones I'm going to continue to learn from. Alrighty, Connected Yoga Teachers, I want to know, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up? Also, a reminder, one way to stay connected to community, Connected Yoga Teachers, is to come to the sketching yoga sequences this Friday. So we're going to close out the episode, and I hope to see you there. Let's hang out and have some fun together.